Good afternoon, this is Daniel here with Cops and Cons TV. I just want to welcome everyone into our live weekly show. Today we're going to go over some of the most important, interesting stories that have happened in policing and in crime over the last week. Before we do that, please make sure that you're subscribing to our channel and that you are almost more important than that is sharing it with friends and family, just so we can get more people in on the discussion. And just like every week as I'm going through these stories, if you think that I'm saying something that you agree with, make sure you put it in there. Or even more important than that, if you think I'm going the wrong track on something, or maybe you have some other additional information that I don't have, put it in the chat. One of my favorite things about this is being able to go back and forth with our viewers. And again, my name is Daniel. You can go ahead and follow me everywhere over at Police Law News. And I just want to welcome everyone in. It looks like we got someone with a great name, Shaquille Oatmeal. Hello. And Sergeant George says he's watching from California. And so good morning, Sergeant George. I just want to say something about California. I've been to California several times. I've spent some time in San Francisco at baseball games. I've been to Lake Tahoe. But a couple weeks ago, I went to LA for the first time. And I know that they always say this, and Adam Carolla always complains about it on his different podcasts. And I lived in Chicago for 22 years, so I'm used to bad traffic. I had never been in traffic like on the 405. It was absolutely terrible. I'm not sure why anyone lives in LA on purpose. But Sergeant George, hopefully you're not in LA because that was awful. But just want to say hey to everyone. Let's see, Shaquille is from Dallas, Texas, and let's see, happy early President's Day, everyone. Absolutely. Let's see if we have any other people in here. I had an officer, Lady Helix started this already. I had an officer tell me it's not illegal to drive without your license. I'd had my wallet stolen. Is this true? That's a really good question, Lady Helix. So the best way that I can answer this is a lot of questions that it depends. So usually there's a couple different, and so every state is going to have different laws around this. But in most states, there's actually going to be two different laws that are applicable in a situation like this. So the first law is that you have to have a valid driver's license. So whether your license is valid, it's suspended, it's a revoked driver's license. So the status of your driver's license, that would be one state statute. The second state statute is often having the physical card on you. So it's very possible that you have a valid driver's license but not the actual card on you. That could be a violation too. However, most of the time, if your license is valid, but it was stolen for a legitimate reason, like through no fault of your own, and you are stopped by a police officer, a lot of times if your license is stolen, you have a police report, or there's some evidence or some proof that that's the case. So as long as your license is valid, you're normal and reasonable to the police officer, and you explain, hey, my wallet was just stolen. Here's the proof of this. I'm actually on my way down right now to get a new one. You're probably not going to get a ticket for it, though I guess anything is possible, right? But you likely wouldn't get a ticket for that, though I guess technically not having the physical card could technically be a violation of the state statute. Nick Voigt, we live in LA because of the weather. All right, Nick, not today, I believe you. Steve Ladner, I love watching your channel, but I usually don't agree with you. Steve, I love that you watch because you and I go back and forth to the comments on videos that I post throughout the week, and I appreciate the back and forth that we have, and it's okay to not agree as long as we go back and forth. I think that is what the interesting thing is. All right, so let's see. Hopefully I'll stay awake because every time I see I end up falling asleep. All right, Sergeant George, we will try to keep you interested today. Okay, so the first story that I'm going to talk about, so this comes out of Memphis, Tennessee, and we spent a lot of time. We've got looks like we have a super chat from Vilified Freedom. Love the channel. God bless America. Vilified Freedom, thank you so much for the super chat. We really appreciate the support. Thank you so much for loving the channel. God bless America. Thank you so much for the super chat. Really appreciate it. Vilified Freedom. All right, so we've talked a lot about Memphis, which is an important thing to talk about. We have to talk about Memphis. The Tyree Nichols case. As these 5 officers who are charged with murder, as these cases proceed through the justice system, and as it goes through the different personnel hearings, we're definitely going to talk about all of that. So So that has to be the main case in Memphis. It is, but it's not the only thing that has happened in the Memphis Police Department recently that is worth talking about. So the first case I'm going to talk about it's with Officer Jeffrey Redd. So Officer Jeffrey Redd is a police officer in Memphis. He's been on the force since 2008. Before that, he was in the Marine Corps. So what happened on this case is earlier on February 2nd of this year, there was a call for service in Memphis. He was at a private business. The caller called in, said that someone was on the property and that they were trespassing, so they called police officers. So Officer Redd and his partner went to the call for service. While they were on the call for service, they found the individual who was trespassing. They made contact with him. By the time they contacted with him, he was actually at a library. Once they made contact with the individual, he pulled out a gun and he shot Officer Redd. Officer Redd suffered serious injuries at that time. Appropriately and predictably, the partner of Officer Redd was able to pull out his firearm, and he shot and he killed the bad guy, who died on scene. Officer Redd did have and suffered from serious injuries. Tragically, he passed away on 2/18. He did die serving his community bravely. And because of everything else that's been going on in Memphis, that again I know we had to talk about, it was the most important story, the Tyre Nichols story. But this story really hasn't made too much national news because of what happened in Memphis. So I just wanted to give show some support for the officers who are still there hanging around in Memphis, and just to note that Officer Redd did pass away. He was serving his community bravely, and hope that he rests in peace. Next case that we're going to talk about, and this has been on the news the last couple days. It actually happened in Florida, in Orange County, Florida, and this case is absolutely crazy. So Orange County deputies, they were on scene at a homicide. This was a homicide of a 38-year-old woman named Natasha Augustin. So 38-year-old female. She was shot to death on scene. Police officers were there. They were on scene. They did all the crime scene stuff, and they started to investigate that case. Well, as what happens normally when there is a major crime that occurs, the media shows up. So the media came, and the media was there for the particular case. About 5 hours after the police had cleared the scene, the police had cleared the scene, and it was no longer an active crime scene, but there was still a news crew that was there on scene. Well, what happened is that the offender actually went back to the scene, and as the news crew was seated in their news van, still on scene, the offender came back on scene, and he shot a reporter and the cameraman who were sitting in their car. The cameraman did have some injuries, but he survived. However, the reporter, a 24-year-old named Dylan Lyons, he did pass away. After that, the offender, he went over to a random residence, and he shot a mother and her 9-year-old daughter. The 9-year-old girl's name is Tiana Major, and she tragically lost her life, and she tragically lost her life as well. Let's see. We do have a Facebook post about this. Let's see. Jesse Weldon commented, "I lost one of my best friends, Dylan, yesterday. I was shot, and now I've had surgery, and I'm okay. Thank you all for the well wishes. I haven't had my phone until now. I'm sorry I haven't been able to respond to most of you. I'm truly very lucky to be alive." So that was a comment from the cameraman, but a 24-year-old reporter, Dylan Lyons, did tragically lose his life. So did the 9-year-old girl. The 9-year-old girl's mother, who was shot and injured, but she will survive. And, I should just note that, being in the news business, it is dangerous, especially when you come up on these scenes, because you don't have security and protection. This is actually the second news team to be killed at a scene in the last decade. So this does occur from time to time. It's absolutely tragic. And I'm not going to say the name of the offender right now, but I should just note a couple things about him. So he is a 19-year-old offender who did this, who killed these people and injured several more. At 19 years old, can anybody guess what what his criminal history is? So at 19 years old, he has been arrested and charged with 8 different felonies and 11 different misdemeanor crimes. So some of the things that he's been charged with in the past are possession of a firearm by a minor and armed robbery. So it's one of those things where, this is someone at 19 years old. They've committed all these crimes. They've been arrested all this time. The idea that this is the kind of person who's going to keep escalating, committing crime, it seems like a very predictable thing. So I just want to put that out there, that this is someone who has a very violent history, has been arrested a lot of times, and it seems like the police officers have been charging him and arresting him throughout the years, even though he's so young. But it's the criminal justice system that is falling apart and really failing the families of these victims. Let's see if we have any other comments on this case. Shaquille O'Neal says this case is crazy yet very sad. Prayers to the family. Absolutely, Sergeant George. Makes you wonder if there was any gang affiliation on the part of the 19-year-old. Yes, Sergeant George, good question. So there have been reports in the news, local news media has said that he was a gang member. Randy Piedmont, do you have any updates on the lawsuit Officer Darian Jarrett's family has brought them against HSI and NMSP? So let's see. So I don't have any off the top of my head, though. We will put that in there for next week. All I know is that lawsuit is currently in federal court, and at least as far as I know, we don't know exactly what's happening with it. Though I should say, because this happened in New Mexico, so a little more information on this. So the lawyer for Darian Jarrett's, Officer Jarrett's family has been appointed to the district attorney in Bernalillo County in New Mexico. So the attorney for the family is now a DA, so we'll see who's going to take over that case. But as far as we know, it's still in federal court. And as soon as we get any updates on it, so it seems like his wife will take the case over. So it looks like the attorney's wife is going to take that case over. She's actually a partner in the law firm, so it should stay with the same law firm. But we will let you know what that happens. Let's see. Officer Blue Gun says, "Why didn't he follow the gun laws?" That's a good point, and this is a line that I say on almost every single show. Officer Blue Gun, you know what I'm about to say. It almost seems like the people who are going to violate our murder laws aren't going to follow our gun control laws. That's kind of shocking. That shouldn't be surprising. And I get into this debate a lot of the time with people, and I was actually going through it, some cases on my TikTok channel, going back and forth with people this week when it talks to, okay, what are we going to do about this gun problem, about the violence problem? And again, I just keep coming back to, so yes, the idea that if you just make more gun laws, that people are going to follow those and that's going to reduce violence. I don't think that's the case. The most violent cities in the country, Washington, D.C., Chicago, New York, for many years and decades, they had the strictest gun laws, yet the most gun violence. So if there's any evidence out there that more gun laws are somehow going to help the violence problem, yes, I disagree, but I'm willing to have the conversation. Put the evidence out there and let's see what actually works. It just seems like trying to do things when it comes to mental health with people who we know have mental health, serious, dangerous mental health issues. Not everyone who's mentally ill, but people who have these mental health issues and they've proven to be dangerous, and also individuals who have committed crimes with guns. So it's just crazy to me that there are a lot of people out there who think that we need to punish everyone who has a gun or make it more difficult for everyone to get guns. But then when we actually have someone who commits a crime with a gun, well, we kind of want to go easy on them because of equity. So to me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That the effort should be 99% of the effort should be towards people who are committing the gun crime, not to everyone in theory out there who wants to own a gun for self-protection. But again, I could be wrong on this, and I would definitely like to see some evidence, research, trust the science, looking at something from the other side. So if there is any study or anything out there that you would like me to read because you think differently, I'd be more than happy to do it. I'm 100% open-minded. Let's see. The Maxo says it's really sad. Even if you were to put a stop to all firearms manufacturing, you wouldn't do much because there's still a ton of black market ones out there. Yeah, that's a really good point, the Maxo, because if you think about it, it's like, right now, there are approximately 400 million guns in the United States. So 400 million guns are in the hands of 100 million people. Those are the ones that we know about, and that's not including police and the military. So, how many guns are out there? Are there 500 million guns out there? So even if you stopped manufacturing new guns today, we have, 400 to 500 million guns out there. So that doesn't make any sense. Vilified Freedom says, we're living in crazy times. Our officers need our support now more than ever. I agree with you 100%, and we're going to get to a story, Vilified Freedom, here in a second where we, actually the next story where we address that specifically. Vilified Freedom, step one is making sure us legal gun owners have our firearms secured. Most of these guns are stolen. Gun safes are a must. I agree with you there. I think it's very important to have firearms locked up. That makes complete sense. Chet says there's trillions. There could be trillions of guns. Who knows? But there's probably 500 million guns. But again, we don't know how many there are exactly. All right, so the next case that I want to talk about. So this happened in Texas, but in Austin, Texas. So, this case is just infuriating to me, and I know you've seen it a couple times. So we're going to call this case Keep Austin Weird. So this was a street race last weekend in Austin, and essentially these street racers, it's not what you might think about, especially if you're from a small town, or even from me, growing up on the south side of Chicago, where, a bunch of the Polish guys and girls would show up on the street and race their cars on the weekends. There would be like 10 of them, and there'd be like, maybe 100 people watching different parking lots of Dunkin' Donuts and stuff like that. That's not what this was. This was a street race that literally took over entire intersections with hundreds of people in Austin, Texas. They took over these intersections. Police did try to come, and they weren't successful. And here's the thing. I don't blame the police at all. The individual police officers, I'm not blaming them, because the management, the police leadership, in order to get to a situation like this, is far higher than any individual police officer who's out there risking their lives trying to make the streets a little bit safer. But there's a lot of videos out there of the police cars being swarmed, of an individual one police car just being swarmed by 100 people. These people were shooting fireworks at police cars. There was at least one officer who was injured. They were banging and beating on police cars. And the worst video footage that I saw about this is police officers retreating, going backwards in their car. And I know that we don't want them to plow through a group of people. I get that we don't want that. But think about it. If your car is swarmed by 100 different people, as a police officer or anybody in a vehicle, you probably can't see where you're going. So really going backwards, is likely almost as dangerous as going forwards, because you can't see who's around, who's behind, if they're swarming your car. And it just, every time I see a police officer retreat, it just makes me cringe. Because what it tells me is that we are literally letting the mob just rule over everything, and giving into mob rule, allowing the mob to push back police officers and make them retreat, is just a terrible precedent to set. Because if the mob can push police officers back and they can take over an intersection, what's going to prevent them from taking over a private business or a private residence? Not much. And it isn't surprising that this happened in Austin, Texas. So back in 2020, there was the Austin City Council voted to defund the police department. And I know that a lot of people saying like, defund the police, that was just a slogan. It actually didn't happen. Well, it did. Defund the police didn't happen everywhere, but defund the police happened in a lot of places. Defund the police in Austin in 2020, they defunded the police by $150 million, money that they took from the police budget, which is actually a third of the police budget that they took away from the Austin Police Department. So it's no surprise that that happened in a place like that. That happened. There's no surprise that happened in a place like that. Yeah, I just want to say that we would really like Matthew McConaughey to play the drums naked while high on police reports, and we don't want to see these kinds of cases. There's a lot more interesting things that can actually happen in Austin. Again, it's in the idea that a lot of these communities want police to be defunded and don't want police, like that actually isn't the case. So around the time that the reason why I use this poll, there's not a lot of polls that I trust, but I do trust Pew polls and Gallup polls. I think they're probably the most accurate polls out there. So what Gallup did is Gallup went to summer of 2020, the summer of violence, just a couple months after George Floyd. And what happened was And what happened in this case, in this poll, was they went to the African-American community and they polled people. And they asked a question. They said, do you want more police, less police, or the same amount of police presence in your community? African Americans, 81% of them, this is in the height of 2020, when citizen police relations were as strained or at the lowest level almost that they've been in my entire lifetime. And they said that 81% of African Americans either wanted the same level of police presence or more police presence. So it's very obvious that we don't want less police presence. People don't want police to be defunded. Now, that doesn't mean that they want any police presence. No, people want good police presence. They want constitutional police presence, constitutional police officers who are going to respect the laws, people's rights, and are going to work with the community to solve their problems, which is the kind of policing that everyone deserves. So watch some of these videos in Austin. It's absolutely insane. Like I said, I cringe every time I see police officers retreat. Oh, Secret Agent Man says abolish qualified immunity and absolute immunity. Secret Agent Man, I have to do this every couple weeks, and I'm going to push back on you. So getting rid of qualified immunity, we're going to do this quick because I've done this a bunch of times, but getting rid of qualified immunity, my big point on this is that it literally won't do anything. So qualified immunity protects police officers from civil lawsuits unless they have violated clearly established rights. So what that means is the bad cases, the George Floyd cases, the Walter Scott cases, the cases that all of us agree these are bad, this is horrible criminal behavior by police officers, they do not get qualified immunity. So a lot of people said, well, qualified immunity, if we get rid of it, it's going to stop all these bad incidents. Well, it's not. Because again, you have to qualify for this, and if you violate clearly established rights, then you absolutely aren't going to get qualified immunity. And let me just put it this way. So I'm gonna list a couple things, all right? So here, if police officers act poorly or commit a crime while on duty, here are some of the consequences. And you think about which one is the most severe. So the first thing that could happen is you may not get qualified immunity, and you may have to pay a $5,000 fine. In a lot of states that have gotten rid of qualified immunity on the state level, it's a low level. It's like $5,000 to $20,000. So that's the worst case scenario. So bad police behavior, if you don't have qualified immunity, you're going to have a $5,000 fine. Okay. The next consequence is that you're fired from your job and you lose your pension. All right. That seems worse than $5,000, considering a police pension could be worth a couple $1,000,000. And the third consequence of bad and illegal police behavior is you end up in prison for 20 years. So I guess what I'm saying is bad and illegal police behavior, you already have these bad consequences for cops. They could go to prison for 20 years. They could lose their career and their pension, which is millions of dollars. And the very last thing on there is a qualified immunity, not having qualified immunity and being fined $5,000. So my point is the idea that somehow getting rid of qualified immunity is going to change otherwise bad acting cops is just a ridiculous thing. And all it says to me is that you truly don't understand this. Also, one last thing, if you get rid of qualified immunity, police unions are going to contract with insurance companies. And the thing is, in these states where they've gotten rid of qualified immunity on the state level, police unions have already contracted with insurance companies. So the police officers still aren't going to pay these things. They are going to be insurance payouts like medical malpractice, which is fine. I'm actually okay with that model because I think that's going to actually protect police officers more. So now if a police officer fucks up, it's not going to be up to a judge whether they get qualified immunity. It's just all going to be covered by the insurance premium. And because police officers it's really hard to recruit and retain police officers. Houston right now is down 600 cops. Seattle can't recruit police officers even though they have a $30,000 sign-on bonus. It is so difficult to recruit and retain good, reasonable, educated, and ethical police officers that what's going to happen is these states that get rid of qualified immunity and police officers have to get the insurance premium, either the police departments, in order to retain police officers, either they're going to just pay these insurance premiums or they're going to give cops a raise in order to pay the premium. So the idea, the premise that getting rid of qualified immunity is going to change anything, we can have a debate about whether it should be that we should get rid of it. Fine, I'm happy to have that debate. But the suggestion that it's going to change anything comes from a place of ignorance, and it's absolutely ridiculous. All right, Sergeant George says this is literally the new meaning to the phrase "inmates are running the asylum." Absolutely. Let's see. Jedi Mind, let's see, Steve says, people gave police the trust and respect to do their jobs, and they have lost it by their own actions. I mean, Steve, I guess. So, I kind of say this, Vilified Freedom, exactly, thank you. Thank you, Vilified Freedom. So I kind of say the same thing all the time, Steve. So I mean, it's, there are 800,000 police officers in the United States. If you watch 10 videos a day of police officers doing something stupid or something illegal, all of us can agree. Again, I'm going to agree with you and say, yeah, the cop shouldn't have done that. That officer was stupid. Yes, that officer involved shooting wasn't lawful and reasonable. The officer should probably be prosecuted and fired. So all of the situations that you give, I'm probably going to agree with you on. But what I'm going to say is, yeah, but today in the United States, the police officers had a total of 750,000 calls for service. Okay, so there were 2, 3, 4, 10, 100 out of 750,000. No, I'm not saying that 10 is okay or 100 is okay, and those should be dealt with on the administrative level. And also, if a police officer commits a crime, as I say all the time, that police officer should be prosecuted. What I'm saying is that statistically, it is unbelievably rare. So I think that we should be able to have an honest discussion that, yes, when we see bad police behavior, we should be able to call it out, and I'm happy to be honest about it. On my TikTok and on my Substack, about half of the articles and the things I say are examples of police officers not doing the right thing or doing something that's unlawful, illegal, or really should be out of policy when it comes to use of force. But in that same conversation, we also have to say that, yeah, but it's still acknowledge the reality and the context that it's 10 out of 750,000, so it's 0.00001% of the time. Yeah, let's call that out. But to not acknowledge that well over 99.99% of the time, this isn't the case when police officers have contact with the public, I think it's just dishonest to not acknowledge that. Let's see. Chet says, ban Californians. Let's see any other questions here. Josh H. Amen to that, Chet. As long as as long as they go by the laws, the cops will not need it. Yeah, no, I agree. that's great. That you're 100% correct. Well, so I'm going to push back a little bit there. So they don't need it. So I'm gonna argue that that if police follow the laws, that's when they need qualified immunity, because anyone can file a lawsuit. It's not like a police officer does something, it's correct, they follow the law, it's on video. We can all sit here as reasonable people and agree, hey, the cops didn't do anything wrong. That doesn't bar someone from filing a lawsuit. So someone can still go ahead and file a lawsuit, and then it's at that point that there could be that qualified immunity comes in. So really, it's really only for police officers who do not violate clearly established laws. If police do violate clearly established laws, we're all going to agree the cops should be punished, and they don't get qualified immunity anyway, so it's kind of a moot point. All right, California needs to go bye-bye. Okay, all right, so that's just what I wanted to say about that Austin case. Watch some of that video. I do have a video of it up on a couple of my channels, but it's absolutely crazy. Again, I cringe every time I see police officers retreat from a scene. Next case I want to talk about, I'm sure everyone's been following the Alec Murdoch case. Listen, even if you don't want to follow the Alec Murdoch case, you can't watch local news, national news, your Facebook feed. You can't really check anything without seeing something about Alec Murdoch. So I don't really do a whole lot of true crime here, even though I think it's interesting, and that's most of the TV that I watch is with my wife is true crime stuff, Dateline and 48 Hours. But I don't really talk about a whole lot of true crime stuff here. But there was one interesting thing about this Alec Murdoch case that I wanted to talk about. So he actually took the stand, and everyone knows he's the guy the attorney in South Carolina, where his family has basically run this city for decades, really. I think like 3 generations of Murdochs have pretty much run this city. His son, who was killed, his name is Paul, but for some reason he calls him Pawpaw. Pawpaw was involved in a boating crash a couple years ago. He was driving reckless, drunk out of his mind, and he did kill one of his friend's girlfriends. She was 19 at the time. And, essentially, Paul and Maggie, the wife, were killed later. Paul and the wife were killed. Maggie, the wife, were killed. Alex Murdoch is charged with that. He's admitted to having an addiction to prescription pills, and it looks like he's stealing all kinds of. He's even admitted to stealing all kinds of client money. So the thing about this is that yes, this case is obviously important. And it said he admitted to doing 2,000 milligrams of hydrocodone a day, which is absolutely a crazy amount of hydrocodone to do. And he said that he had this prescription pill, this addiction to opiates for the last couple decades. So, this case, so let's say this case, he was never charged with murder. All of the financial crimes, the millions of dollars of financial crimes, I'm pretty sure this guy's like, he's probably about 60 years old. Murdoch, I don't know how old he is, he's in his 50s or 60s. He's looking at decades in prison just from the financial crimes. So let's say something happens with this criminal case, this homicide, even if it's a hung jury and they don't retry him or he's found not guilty, even if that's the case, which I don't think will happen, but even if that's the case, he's looking at decades in prison for the financial crimes, so he's not going to get out anytime soon. So in a case like that, which is really a circumstantial case, it makes sense. It makes sense that he would testify. One, he's an attorney, and he doesn't want to keep his mouth shut. So even if it was against the advice of his attorneys, he really doesn't have anything to lose. It's almost always a bad idea for a defendant to testify, but it's a Hail Mary pass. He had to take the chance because, again, whether or not he's found guilty, he's going to do decades in prison. So we all knew that Alec Murdoch was going to testify, and he did. And what I think was interesting about this, and you can go ahead and watch video on this, but I don't know that much about body language stuff, but I have listened to a couple experts, and they've talked about it in a couple of the psychology and law classes that I took. Let's see, Vilified Freedom, gotta run, keep up the good work, God bless. We all need it. Vilified Freedom, thank you so much for the super chat. Really appreciate that again. Thank you for all of the good questions today and comments, Vilified Freedom. Thank you again. We really appreciate the support. So Alec Murdoch. So but in some of the law and psychology classes that I have taken, it's really strange to see a couple of these things. It's really strange to see a couple of these things that we saw in this case. Did we get another one? I was 737 FA. Send us a super chat as well. Thank you so much for that. There's no comment with it, but we really appreciate that. We keep the lights on for super chat. So again, thank you so much for the support. We really appreciate it. I was a 737 FA. Thank you so much. But if you look at Alec Murdoch, what he was doing, so they asked him a couple questions. They asked him a question, if he killed his son and then if he killed his wife. And both times he was saying no. He was saying no, that he didn't denying it, but he was shaking his head yes, which is absolutely strange. So when you look at just very basic level body language stuff from body language experts, it's one of the telltale and obvious signs that someone's being deceptive is when they're saying no, but they're shaking their head yes. And if you look at it, both times that he gave those answers saying no, he was shaking his head yes the whole time as he was saying. That was something that I noticed while watching his testimony, which I thought was pretty strange. And one of the ridiculous things about this case is that, so the main thing comes down to, so Maggie and the son, Pawpaw, were killed at these dog kennels. Well, during his interviews with police officers, Murdoch had said over multiple interviews, over multiple different months, that he was never at the dog kennels, that he just never went down to the dog kennels. Well, he finally admitted that he actually was down at the dog kennels. So that he actually was down at the dog kennels. He was there. He admitted to being there. Chat, and thank you for the super chat. Chat, yes, thank you. That he admitted that he was down at the dog kennels. And so they said, well, why didn't you tell police officers that? Why didn't you tell police you were there? Why did you lie? And here's the reason he gave to lying, and it's absolutely ridiculous. Murdoch said that the reason he lied was because he was afraid of the police. He was intimidated by the police. Now, again, this is a guy whose family basically runs the DA's office and the police department. When his son, Pawpaw, was involved in that boating crash, driving the boat, operating the boat in a reckless manner, drunk out of his mind, and he killed a 19-year-old girl, during that, There were no field sobriety tests that happened afterwards. There was no chemical test or forced chemical test through a warrant. He wasn't immediately arrested like any of us would have been. So the idea that there isn't, so it's this unbelievable privilege that the Murdoch family has, and to claim that he was afraid of police is absolutely ridiculous. Listen, Murdoch and most other people who say that the reason that they did something or committed a crime is because they're afraid of police, they're not afraid of police, they're afraid of the consequences. And that's what's extremely irritating about this. Hopefully the jury sees through this bullshit. Sergeant George, let's see, a huge shout out to Titania for covering the Alex Murdoch trial on her trial. Okay, all right. I was the 737 FA. He needs to be locked away from us. I agree 100%. Steve Ladner says, how are gun laws deemed to be constitutional? That's a good question. We could do an entire episode on that. But Steve, some gun laws are found to be not constitutional. So as I said earlier in the show, I grew up in Chicago. I lived there till I was 22. The entire time that I lived in Chicago, me and my family, because we lived in the city limits, we were not allowed to own a firearm. So that was the law. So that was eventually challenged. New York had a similar law, right? So since 2005, since I moved from Chicago, the Supreme Court has said that those laws actually are not constitutional. So sometimes gun laws aren't constitutional. If they get challenged and the court hears it, they're able to find that, because now you can own a firearm in Chicago and in New York City, which wasn't the case when I grew up in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. Okay, the next case that I want to talk about, and this is a case that we've talked about a whole bunch of times, but there is a little bit of an update. So it was the most important case from 2022. It was the Uvalde case. Everyone remembers Uvalde, what a shit show that was, how it was just an awful, horrible response by the police officers. There were 376 police officers that arrived on scene. From the time they arrived on scene, it took 77 minutes for them to storm the classroom and kill the bad guy who was shooting kids and teachers. 19 students and 2 teachers were killed, and 17 more were injured. The Texas Department of Public Safety put all the blame, essentially, even though they had officers there on scene, essentially put all the blame on the chief of police of the Uvalde School District, not the city of Uvalde, Uvalde School District Police Chief Pete Arredondo, Slippery Pete. They pretty much put all of the blame on Pete Arredondo. Pete pushed back through his attorney and through a whole bunch of things. Pete pushed back and he said, hey, I was one of the first to respond. When I got there on scene, I was, who knows what he was doing because he didn't have his bulletproof vest on, but Pete said, I got on scene and I literally ran into the school as fast as I possibly could, and so I was acting as a first responder. I wasn't acting as a chief of police or managing the scene. I was in the fight. I was literally outside the door, which is obviously problematic, which is what happened outside the door. But that argument from Pete Arredondo, like I could kind of see it, because you have to think about it like this. Okay, so you have literally 376 police officers descending on the scene from 10, 20 different agencies, both local, county, state, and federal. So if someone is going to manage that scene, would you have someone who is inside the building, at the front door, inside the building, like while there's gunfire going on? Should that person be the one managing the scene, coordinating resources, and doing all of the 7 critical tasks that police managers are supposed to do? I would say no. I would say absolutely not. But the problem is that even though that's what Pete Arredondo thought, he never communicated that. And no one on the outside perimeter ever said, I'm the incident commander. Now, when you're establishing an inner perimeter, an outer perimeter, securing all the communications, when you're talking about trying to get other resources there, establishing a command center and a zone for the media, having someone say and be the incident commander, that's the first step in all of that. So no one took charge. Yes, it's on Pete Arredondo. It's on all of the command staff who were there. I've said that consistently. All of the command staff were absolutely terrible because no one established themselves as a leader. Another problem on a technical level, which again goes back to leadership and also through funding, so leadership from the city council and politicians, is that none of the radios talk to each other. So the city of Uvalde police, the border patrol, the state police, the Texas Rangers, the Uvalde school police, none of their radios were on the same frequency, so they couldn't talk to each other. They had to use cell phones to call each other. I mean, so it's absolutely crazy. It was a mess. But so Pete Arredondo was fired from the Uvalde. He was fired as the chief of police from the Uvalde United School District, which is reasonable. We all kind of expected him to be fired, and he was fired. back in August of 2022. So the way they do it in Texas, and obviously he challenged the firing. So, he's just like any other state employee, city employee, government employee. He does have the option to challenge it. It goes to like a labor relations board. So he did challenge that through an attorney. And again, what I think is defensible from Pete Arredondo is his actions, just like all the police officers who were outside of the room, not entering while this guy was shooting kids or while kids were literally injured and dying. There's no excuse for that. They should all be terminated. There's no question about that. But the idea that he was supposed to be the manager of the whole situation from inside, I get his argument on that. That's a little silly, right? So I think we can separate it that, yes, he did enough fault to definitely be fired, but yeah, we shouldn't blame him for not being the manager because, again, no other critical incident is someone who's inside, he wasn't, but in the gunfight, they are not expected to be the police manager who should be outside the scene kind of looking at everything, not inside, where you have no idea what's going on outside. So I hope I made that clear. The way they do it in Texas is when you're terminated, this board can decide, like, essentially, it's kind of like the military, like how you are discharged from your job as being a police chief. So they do it as honorable, dishonorable, and general. So a search through his personnel files found that after this hearing, and no one from the commission would come on and do any kind of an interview, but it basically said that there was, after his appeal, all of his paperwork, essentially there's no mention of it being a dishonorable on his record. So in theory, he can apply for another chief job in Texas. Now, even though that's the case, he can. Obviously, even if he does, no one is going to hire him, right? But it did not go down as a dishonorable. It did not go down as anything dishonorable for the reason that he was fired. Shaquille O'Neal, Pete dodged press conferences and council meetings. He was wrong. Shaquille O'Neal, you are 100%. And yeah, and absolutely. So he was actually set to be sworn in as a city councilor, if you remember, that he actually won a seat on city council. He missed a bunch of council meetings, so he was basically off the council as well. Yeah, no, he made all kinds of errors. And like I said, I think it's reasonable to say anything he did inside was terrible, was awful, and he should 100% be fired for that. That should be dishonorable. But again, the argument that he should have been the incident commander from inside the building literally makes no sense based on all police training and practice. Doesn't make any sense. Now, the fact that he didn't communicate that's problematic, right? So he should have said, hey, yeah, I'm the police chief, but fuck, I'm in this thing. I'm inside. So you need to have someone from Texas DPS, Uvalde City, some other commander needs to be the IC. I'm going to be in here as a first responder. So he never said that. He never went through with that. So again, there's a lot to criticize with Pete Arredondo. He should have been fired. It should be dishonorable. But I just kind of wanted to make that distinction a little bit. Officer Blue Gun, captain of the ship, has to find his way to the helm. Absolutely, and he did not in this particular case. Shaquille O'Neal, they were right to fire his butt. They were 100%. Sergeant George says, coming from someone who was once a Detroit SWAT team officer, coming up with a game plan for how to enter the building is a huge must. To hell with Pete Arredondo. Agree. And again, Sergeant George and everyone else, he should have been fired. His actions were horrible, and the termination should be considered dishonorable. Though, even though it's not, it would be very, very, very difficult for him to be ever be hired again. I really don't think that would be the case. All right, so that was that case. We've talked a lot about that. Again, he'll never apply or get another job, but yeah, that's it. There's been also a lot of talk about the Alec Baldwin case. Alec Baldwin case is such an interesting legal case. So on the Alec Baldwin case, there's been some information I just wanted to clear up where some of the charges have been dismissed. That's what they're reporting. And yeah, that's kind of true. So here's what happened. Everybody knows the facts of the case, of the Alec Baldwin case, where he didn't pull the trigger on the magic gun that killed Helena Hutchins and injured the director Joel Souza. But some of the charges were dropped. So here's what happened. So Alec Baldwin and the armor from Rust were charged with involuntary manslaughter, which in New Mexico carries a penalty of up to 18 months. But the prosecutor not only charged them with involuntary manslaughter, but the prosecutor also charged them with a firearm enhancement enhancement, essentially involuntary manslaughter. If you use a firearm, instead of that 18 months per the law, that can be increased to 5 years. So that's what he was looking for. The district attorney Mary Carmack Altweiss understood the concerns of the film Armorer, sloppy handling of the firearms. So basically, the judge allowed for Gutierrez-Reed to have a firearm at home for self-defense as a part of her conditions of release. That was the Armorer. However, she can't talk to any other witnesses. Must not consume alcohol. Just those are some of the conditions of release. So they were both charged with involuntary manslaughter. Maximum penalty of 18 months. New Mexico has this firearm enhancement, which says involuntary manslaughter with a firearm, you have a penalty of 5 years in prison. So a lot of states have these enhancements. A lot of times there's an enhancement for if it's considered a hate crime. Also, a lot of states have these enhancements if it's a crash. Let's say it's a vehicular homicide crash. If the person is drunk, DUI, a lot of times there's a drunk driving enhancement. So you get enhanced punishments if you do something that's a little more malicious. Well, that's the case here in New Mexico. But here's the problem: that law, that firearm enhancement law, it actually didn't go into effect until after the shooting on the Rust scene happened. So how the prosecutor missed that, I don't have any idea how the prosecutor missed that, but the firearm enhancement was dismissed, as it should have been, because it wasn't the law at the time. And I mean, that's how this works. You can't have something that happens and then lawmakers afterwards they set in a whole bunch of laws, then you retroactively apply them. Again, not how the law works. It's what the law was at the time of the incident, right? So the firearm enhancement being dismissed was the appropriate thing. It was an oversight by the DA somehow. Even though they took like 9 months to investigate this and to file charges, not sure how they missed that, but that was dismissed. Alec Baldwin is looking at 18 months in prison maximum if he is convicted. And the last case I'm going to talk about, a little bit of a teaser, because this is a complicated case, really interesting case. There's a lot to it. So I'm going to kind of give a teaser, and I want everyone to kind of think about it and then, maybe have some questions for next week. So I'm going to go into a deep dive next week. So this is a case that happened this past week in Washington, D.C. So the long story short is that there was an assault call. Police officers got there. They contacted the victim of the assault. They were given a description of the offender. Police officer contacts someone who, doesn't really match the description, but someone who's in the area. Police officer contacts the individual who's actually a passenger in a vehicle. The police officer contacts them, asks them to step out of the vehicle. They refuse. There's a struggle. The person says, "I'm not involved," which ends up being the case. They weren't involved. During the struggle, the police officer is involved in a shooting and kills the person. The individual was shot and killed during the struggle. The police officer is Alex Rosario Baroa, and the individual is named Stephen Shaw. And he was not the individual who was in the assault. He was not involved in it at all. The officer had the wrong person. There was an officer involved shooting, and Mr. Shaw did die. So that's a story that I'm going to talk about, and that just has so many elements of a lot of what we talk about. So we not only have the victim of a crime, a victim who deserves justice, just like anyone would be when they're a victim of a crime. So we have a legitimate victim of a crime. We have information being given to police officers trying to apply that information that they have in the moment in real time, which, again, human performance would dictate that's not only perfect. Then they contact the individual that they think is involved, who isn't involved, and the individual doesn't comply, essentially resists arrest. Now, it wasn't a good arrest, but the officer obviously didn't know that at the time. Now, there's an argument they should have been more careful, of course, but, the individual resists arrest, and there's an officer involved shooting, and tragically, the individual died. So I'm going to go into it in detail next week, but and it's on body camera video. You can watch this thing. I encourage everyone to do it. Again, it's Officer Alex Rosario Baroa in Washington, D.C. And I just want to put it out there for everyone to think about this. There's virtually that best way that I can explain it, it's an example that Sam Harris gave. I don't know how many people listen to Sam Harris. I've been a big fan for a long time. And Sam Harris, he's a white guy, but he gave this example on his show a couple years ago, and I always think about it. Here's what Sam Harris said. And Sam Harris, if you ever see a picture of him, he looks almost exactly like Ben Stiller. So Sam Harris says, he's like, here I am, a 50-year-old white guy. I'm walking around the streets. I'm doing my thing. I know that I haven't committed a crime. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm minding my own business. But unbeknownst to me, the police officers get a call that someone who looks exactly like Ben Stiller just did a robbery at a convenience store. And Sam said, if police officers come around the corner and they see me and I happen to be a half a block away, yes, it would be reasonable for the police officers to stop and detain me because I match the general description. Now, I know that I didn't do anything wrong. I know that I didn't commit a robbery, but a reasonable suspicion to detain someone, that's a pretty low bar. And then even though I know I didn't do anything, it's reasonable for the police officers to think that I did. And Sam Harris makes a good point. He says, if you didn't do anything wrong and you want to convince police officers that you didn't do anything wrong, the worst thing you should do is run, fight, or resist. Because police officers who think that you might have done something wrong, if you want to add more evidence to that bucket that they think you're guilty, go ahead and run and fight from police officers. And I think that's the right way to look at this, is that yes, it's inconvenient, it's annoying, it's irritating, and maybe it's illegal for the police officers to detain you if something like that happens. But is it better than dying? Is it better than being in a use of force incident? What I always say is my preference in all of this, and what I want the outcome to be, is there for there to be less violence between police and citizens. I want less citizens to get injured and killed. I want less officers to get injured and killed as well. So the best way for that is, if you are contacted or stopped by a police officer, is just to comply. Yes, if they put you in handcuffs because they're investigating, just comply. Now afterwards, file a complaint, file a lawsuit. Listen, if the police officers actually did violate your rights, there are dozens, hundreds, sometimes thousands of attorneys who are going to be fucking fighting with each other in order to represent you, because a civil rights violation case that's obvious is unbelievable and easy money for an attorney. So again, yes, it's irritating, but what I don't want is for something like this to happen. Now, I'm not placing the blame on Mr. Shaw who died on this case. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying we should be able to have a conversation where if this happens, and it's going to happen, because again, police officers aren't psychics. They get some information from a victim, which who knows how much information that they're given, and then they go out in the real world and they try to apply that to people, maybe in a situation where there's a lot of people who look like Ben Stiller, and they're doing the best they can. But again, if a situation like that happens, it's always my preference, yes, just comply with the police officers. That way there's I want to say no chance of violence, because the Memphis 5 can be out there, just who knows what they're going to do. But there's virtually almost no risk of getting injured or killed by police if you comply. And yes, if the police were wrong, if they violated your rights, go after them. File a complaint, file a lawsuit, and everyone's alive, which is absolutely my preference. All right, a couple comments here before we go. Let's see. Chet says it is better than living. Okay. Let's see, James Echo. Yeah, you mentioned the case. We're going to research it for next week, and we'll get there. Teal Static says the quicker you comply, the quicker they can go and catch the real bad guy. Yeah, absolutely. Sergeant George, to be in a use of force incident is like having to deal with a bull on a rampage. Yeah, use of force incidents are difficult. Steve Ladner, keyword is illegal. Yeah, Steve, it would be illegal if there's no reasonable suspicion. You're right. But again, maybe in these cases there is no reasonable suspicion, but that's up for a judge to decide. And if a police officer violates someone's rights, I really do not have any qualms with police officer being punished for violating rights. Steve Ladner, file a complaint for the police to investigate themselves and laugh in your face. Well, that's not really the case, especially if you file a lawsuit. Police officers aren't the ones who sit on courts. Last comment. All right, Daryl Smith. There's a huge divide in America between law enforcement and the people, and there needs to be a bridge built between this gap and the fact that because someone said something is not the answer. We need them and they need us. Daryl Smith, that's a perfect comment. Yes, there is a divide. We need to fill that divide. Just like I said after I explained the Austin case this week, is that yes, people want police officers, they want police presence, but they want good police officers. They want constitutional police officers. That is something that everyone deserves in this country, because we are all equal under the law. All right, I hope that everyone has a great weekend, and please make sure that you subscribe to our channel, share it with your friends. If you put in comments over the next week, I'll definitely get to them, and I respond back and forth. Want to thank everyone for being here, and have a great weekend.